Shabbat shalom, family. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom. Hope y'all having a good, peaceful Shabbat, peaceful Sabbath. Today is actually at my assembly. We're actually taking a Sabbath rest. As far as not assembling this Shabbat. Which I feel is very important. Because we are actually supposed to rest on the Shabbat. Now, there's nothing wrong with fellowship at all. But sometimes, resting is, very important, and just, you know what I mean? Just taking a break and everybody just in their own homes and, just resting. So, needless to say, I still try to find a way to teach, um, whether I'm in the assembly or whether I'm at home. I just love teaching. And if you are curious, I am a part of the assembly called the Ten Commandments Keepers of Yah. We are located in Hinesville, Georgia. We have a small but growing congregation. And I don't even like to use that word congregation, but, assembling of believers, assembling of Israelites. So today we got part 3 of our Identifying Israel series. You know what I mean? So I hope the last one bless y'all. I know the first one, that did, quite a few numbers, which, hey, I'll praise to the Most High Yah for that. But before we get into the teaching, we're going to pick up where we left off last time. But before we get into the teaching, I'd like to go ahead and pray. I know some people, they don't, they think it's a commandment to not pray, to pray with your head covered. You shouldn't be doing that. So in respect of everybody and how they interpret the scriptures, I'm going to take my head covering off to pray, but I'm not going to take my head covering off to teach, because I'll still be in accordance with that epistle of Paul and that advice that he was giving. So I'm going to take my head covering off, and we're going to pray. We're going to get into it. And I pray it bless y'all. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in the Shamayim. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us of our trespass as we forgive those who have trespassed against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Father, for kingship, power, and glory are yours forever. We thank you, Father, for just the information, Father, that is just coming out, Father, for the earth bearing witness, Father, of who we are, of who your true people are, Father. We just thank you for that. We ask, Father, that you just allow this information to edify many, wake up many dry bones, Father. We just thank you for just every person that's watching this live right now or that's going to watch it in the future. I ask that you bless them as well, Father, and give them eyes to see and ears to hear, Father. So with that, I just want to say thank you. We have no hate in our heart towards anyone, Father, because vengeance is yours and you will give the recompense, Father. So we just want to say thank you for that. Thank you for being our avenger, Father. Thank you for being our refuge, and just thank you for being our Elohim. You are the Most High, and we praise you. Abba Yah. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. So let's get into it, y'all. Let's get into it. I know many people pronounce his name differently. I got a shirt that say Yahweh, but sometimes I say Yahuwah. Sometimes I say Yahweh. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get my head covered right. So I'm not one as far as to get into the whole pronunciation debates and stuff like that, because at the end of the day, when Yahusha comes back, he's going to restore our true language and our true tongue. So I don't really get into all those semantics. So without further ado, let's get back into it where we left off last time, talking about Weta. I'm going to share my screen. All right, there we go. All right, so here we go. So we looked at the Negro land map, right, where you have the Tooth Coast or the Ivory Coast. You also have the Gold Coast, and then you got the Grain Coast as well. But then you got the Slave Coast, where they took the slaves from, a majority of them. And the Slave Coast is called the Kingdom of Judah, right, or Weta. And this is the thing. A lot of people like to try to dismiss it and say, well, that don't mean Kingdom of Judah because it's talking about Weta and all this type of stuff. And you can still go to that place in Benin right now, Weta, and that's what the local inhabitants call it. But one thing you have to realize is that there were a lot of different tribal wars in that area of Weta or Judah, and the original inhabitants of that land were taken into slavery for the most part. And you had tribes like the Dahomies, The Dahomey tribe, the Amazonian female warriors who were actually assisting in the slave trade and assisting in putting our people in bondage, but we celebrate them with the Woman King movie. Go figure. But tribes like that were warring against the true Israelites who lived in those places. And so to prove that Weta actually means Judah, this is a French source called Société Langue d'Océan de Géographie by I can't even pronounce this name, but you can look this source up in your own time. But this is the original French. This is what it said originally, but this is the English translation. Weta, Fida, Weta, Judah, or Ajuda is a city frequented since the 16th century by the Portuguese slavers, which gave it its name. All right, let's pause right there. The name Weta or Judah, however you pronounce it, Fida, Judah, Weta, whatever, the name was given by the Portuguese slavers. So the Portuguese slavers named that territory Judah or Weta. You see what I'm saying? It wasn't the original inhabitants that gave it that name. It was the Portuguese who gave it that name because they knew who lived in that area. You see what I'm saying? And then it goes on to say its inhabitants were said to be Judaquids or the Jews, and they were indeed considered to be a remnant of the scattered tribes of Israel. To the north, the Alala River, whose real name is Ephra, had become the Euphrates for scholars. So the name Weta was given by the Portuguese slavers, the Portuguese slave traders, according to this source right here. And this source was written in 1890. So that should clear up a lot of this confusion as far as you got content creators going over to Weta and they talking to voodoo priests and they talking to the original inhabitants who lived there in 2024 who weren't around in 1890 and all this type of stuff, right? Not saying that those people don't have a sense of history, but at the same time, there was a lot going on during the slave trade. There were tribes who had overtaken other tribes, who had overtaken territories, who had sold other people into slavery. But the Portuguese knew this because the Europeans were orchestrating all of these different tribal wars in order to get slaves, right? And so they're the ones who gave this territory the name of Judah or Weta. And they gave it that name because it was said that the Jews were living there. The inhabitants were the scattered tribes of Israel. So that clears up Weta right there. So let's go into the next source that talks about Weta, right? This is The Earth and Its Inhabitants, the Universal Geography of West Africa by L.C. Recluse, written in 1830. This is page 267. Look this up in your own time. Most, if not all of these sources, I looked up myself and I went and I actually found these sources. So it isn't like somebody is making these sources up. All right, so it says Dahomey. East of Great Popo begins the Dahomey territory, guarded by the important town of Glewe, known to Europeans by the various names of Fida, Huida, Weta, Widu. The old writers called it Judah, and its inhabitants were said to be Jews, while the neighboring river Alala, whose real name is Ephra, became the Euphrates. During the flourishing days of the slave trade, from 16 to 18,000 were annually transported from Judah. All right. So during the flourishing days of the slave trade, 16 to 18,000 were transported yearly from Judah. So 16 to 18,000 Jews were transported from, or Israelites, rather, whatever you want to say, Jews, Israelites, Yahudim, they were transported from Judah to the New World. As the Portuguese called this place, which at the time had a population of 35,000, the tutelar deity of Weta is the snake, and its famous fetish temple is served by priestesses called mothers or sisters or serpents, and recruited by the abduction of young girls on feast days, right? And so that's what they practice over there now, especially as far as with the they worship the snake and different things like that. And what tribe does that remind you of? What tribe symbol is the snake? Is it not Dan, the tribe of Dan? Now, I'm not saying these are Danites, but I'm just, making a correlation. Let's get into the next source. This source is the Creole New Orleans Race and Americanization, written by Arnold R. Hirsch and Joseph Logsdon. This is on page 67. It says there was only a handful of black slaves in Louisiana before the first slave trading ship arrived from Africa in 1719, right? Because you got to realize New Orleans was a port as well, right? And New Orleans was French, controlled by the French. So that's why you got different cultures in the United States. Whereas, the South is the South, but at the same time, there's different cultures within the South. So if you go over to Louisiana, they have a totally different culture than, say, Georgia or Alabama or South Carolina, is because of that French influence, right? So it says the first slave trading ship arrived from Africa in 1719, the year after New Orleans was founded. Between 1719 and 1731, 22 of the 23 slave ships that came from Africa while France ruled Louisiana arrived. Between June 1719 and January 1731, 16 slave trading ships arrived in Louisiana from the Senegal region, right? 6 ships came from Judah or Ouida, a slave trading post on the Gulf of Benin near Dahomey, right? Where those 16 to 18,000 Jews were transported annually. Same place that was said to be, the inhabitants were said to be the Judaquees or the Jews or the scattered tribes of Israel. This is the same place. And these ships brought slaves from here, and the descendants of these people still live here in America. And one from Cabinda, Angola, right? Angola is another key territory. Really, all the west coast of Africa, from Mauritania down to Angola, down to Congo, is, man, this is where our people were scattered to. But we'll get into that. I ain't gonna get ahead of myself. So it says one ship came from Cabinda, Angola, during the same period. The slave trade from Senegal intensified after 1725. Between February 1726 and January 1731, 12 slave ships from Senegal landed 3,259 slaves at Belize at the mouth of the Mississippi River. During the same period, one ship from Judah landed 464 slaves at the same port. The only other slave trading ship that came from Africa to Louisiana while the colony was under French rule arrived in 1743 and was from Senegal. Right. So we clearly see that slaves in America, uh, some of them came from this place in Negro land called the Kingdom of Judah, where these Portuguese slavers gave it its name because they said the Jews lived there, right? And so they took these inhabitants, 16 to 18,000 annually. Now we know a lot of them might have been going to the Caribbean, going down to South America, but a portion of them did come to North America, right? But at the end of the day, all of us, all of the descendants of slaves, most, not at least 95% of us were Israelites. We were just in different territories. We had, whether we came from the Kingdom of Judah on the slave coast, whether we came from Angola, during the Spanish Inquisition, whether we came from Senegal area, where you had the Yahudim met as well. No matter where you came from, Nigeria, they're all Israelites. All right, so here's the source, Sir Harry Johnston, The Negro in the New World. I know a lot of y'all are probably familiar with this source, but I still want to bring it out, because people can't, man, one thing about it, people can deny anything they want to, but they can't deny historical sources, especially from close to the times of when a lot of these things was happening. You see what I'm saying? So just like, they may have their pseudo sources where they might be newer, you know what I mean, to the point of where they're trying to explain away things and whitewash it like they did during the times of the Renaissance. We can't get past these old sources and what these older sources are saying. We can't get past the hieroglyphs. We can't get past the depictions of ancient peoples showing that they were in fact Negroid. So this Sir Harry Johnston in Negro in the New World, written in 1910. This is page 27. It says the Elamites appear to have been a Negroid people with kinky hair and have transmitted this racial type to the Jews and the Syrians. So the Elamites, Elam is a son of Shem, right? Is a descendant of Shem. The Elamites are the Shemites as well. So they're, related to and come from the same lineage as the Israelites, and pretty all Abrahamic tribes, as well as the Syrians, right? The Chaldeans, all of those. So right here, he's saying that the Elamites of Mesopotamia were a Negroid race, and they had kinky hair, and they had a Negroid phenotype. They were a Negroid people. So I mean, What else more can we say to this? There is a curliness of the hair, together with the Negro eye, full lips, in a in the portrait of Assyria, which what in the portraiture of Assyria, which conveys the idea of an evident Negro element in Babylonia, right? Because one thing you have to realize, right, and this is where I love when people, especially more Eurocentric people and stuff like that, they have this idea that the Middle East in Mesopotamia, that somehow, if you say that somebody's from, let's say, Iraq or Mesopotamia or whatever, that automatically means that they're Middle Eastern, right? We hear that term all the time, Middle Eastern, or um, dang, what's the word I'm looking for? Mediterranean type, all that type of stuff. This is all new, made up concepts, right? But I always ask people, especially who say, well, Abraham was from Mesopotamia, so that means he was Middle Eastern. Okay, who was ruling Mesopotamia at the time? Who was the first ruler of Mesopotamia? Was it not uh, Nimrod, the son of Cush? Did not the territory of Cush stretch from East Africa all the way to Iraq? All that, even over to India, that was all Kush. And Kushites are what? Black, right? And we see throughout scripture that the Israelites, the Shemites, have always had close relationships and close proximity to Kushites and Mitzrites or Egyptians, right? So they say father is the ham of the black races. Why is it that Shem's descendants, a lot of them always intermingle and co-mix with the descendants of Ham? You see what I'm saying? But the point I'm trying to make is that, well, oh, Abraham was from Mesopotamia. Okay, so was Nimrod, son of Cush, who actually ruled Mesopotamia, which would make Mesopotamia a Cushite civilization, aka a black civilization. You see what I'm saying? So there's no, it's not a surprise that it's talking about a Negro element in Babylonia, right? But I'm gonna digress on that point. I'm gonna keep going. Quite probably, the very ancient Negro invasion of Mediterranean Europe, of which the skeletons of the Alps Maritimes are vestiges, came from Syria in Asia Minor on its way to Central and Western Europe. So it's saying there was a Negro invasion of the Mediterranean. And that we know this to be true, because even if you look into a lot of the genetics of the Mediterranean people, like the Greeks, for example, a lot of them have haplogroup E as well. A lot of them, and see, this is why I always like to tell people, race is a made up concept. Race is not real. Genetics, now, don't get me wrong, of course you can classify people, because you got people who look alike, you can, but at the same time, that does not make it to where, you know, all black people come from the same place, or all white people come from the same place, or all brown people come from the same place. No, that is not true, because you had a lot of mixing and intermingling, because a lot of populations are, especially a lot of populations where, like, say, the Hispanic population or the Mediterranean population or the Middle Eastern population, the Arabs and all this stuff, they're a mixture of a lot of different people groups, right? Because you got to think of what was going on in those lands. There was always conquering and reconquering of the lands. And with the conquering of the lands, what did you have? You had the mixing of the people who came and conquered the lands. So over time, you would get a person who would have a lot of different genetic backgrounds because of the mixing. That's why you see a lot of these people, especially if you look in Latin America. You see what I'm saying? Latin American, a lot of not Latin America, but in, just in the Latino countries and the Hispanic countries, there was a lot of mixing going on. That's why a lot of them have quote unquote African DNA, while they have European DNA as well. You see what I'm saying? And they have a lot of different DNA inside of them, to the point to where they're mixed up. But at the same time, what determines who they are? It's their father's seed. It's their father's line. So if your father's line goes back to Europe, then that's who you are. You're a son of Japheth. Or if it goes back to Shem, you're a son of Shem. If it goes back to Ham, you're a son of Ham. No matter what color you are. You see what I'm saying? Now, that's not to sit here and say that, that basically, just because, how do I want to frame this? Just because, right, we know that race is not a real concept, doesn't mean that You don't have specific phenotypes for specific people groups, right? So we understand that as well. But at the same time, somebody from that people group can go and intermingle with another person from another people group, and the product or the offspring may not look like that original phenotype, but they're still of that same tribe. So that's the point I'm trying to make. Um, Oh, another point I wanted to make. So there was a Mediterranean, there was an invasion of the Mediterranean by the Negroes, right? And they came from Syria and Asia. The origin of the Negro, not the African Hamite, I'm talking about the Negro, right? Specifically people in the diaspora and like African Americans. Our background is Asiatic. It's in our DNA. Haplogroup E, as I will break down later, is an Asiatic, is a Eurasian haplogroup. It originated in Eurasia. It didn't originate in Africa. And I'm going to prove that. I'm going to go on to prove that. And there's a lot of different things in our genetics that also attest to our Asiatic background. Like for example, why is it that you ever heard of the term Mongolian spots, where pretty much a baby may have a blue spot on them when they're first born, or it might be on their back or wherever the case may be. They call those Mongolian spots because the term was coined by a scientist who observed this among Mongolian peoples, right, who are Asiatic or Asian peoples. And although they may be the more paler Asians, why is it that you don't find those nowhere in no other communities, those Mongolian spots? You don't find it in Europeans. You don't find it in a lot of different Africans. You don't find it in, a lot of different Mediterranean populations, but you only find it in Asian populations, and you find it at a 95% rate in African American populations as well. Why is that? What do African Americans have in common with Asians if we're not? You see what I'm saying? If we're supposed to just be African, why do we have a lot of different things in our DNA that attest to us being Asiatic? You see what I'm saying? So that's something I want y'all to look into. Look into Mongolian spots. Why is it that African Americans or the descendants of slaves have these Mongolian spots, but no other race of people or groups of people do other than Asian peoples? You see what I'm saying? So I digress. Let's keep going. It is possible that in or on the verge of Arabia, the ancient basal stock of the generalized Negro parted, divided into two great streams of divergent immigration, one to proceed to Europe via Syria, and the other to pass through Arabia to Egypt and tropical Africa. In Arabia or in Egypt, it may be arose the difference between the long-headed African Negro and the more rounder-headed Bushman, or the rounder, shorter-headed Bushman. I'm sorry. The last name becoming more inhabited than his conquerors, to a life in arid deserts or scrubby open country. So he's differentiating skull shapes, and he's making a distinction between the longer headed African Negro and the shorter headed Bushman. Now the Bushmen are originally Hamites, like the pygmy tribes that you can find in the Congo, or even in some places in East Africa and stuff like that. Those are more, Bushman type of, that's why I say all black people aren't the same. You can't just say, well, just because your skin color is this, and you may have similar phenotypes, that you're the same, because we even know that Moses was mistaken for an Egyptian. We know that Paul was mistaken for an Egyptian. You see what I'm saying? So we see that Shemites were mistaken for Hamites a lot of times. Joseph, you see what I'm saying? All these different examples. So just because they may be of the same hue in a similar phenotype doesn't make them the same, right? Because it is true, more African Americans have a longer skull. We have a dolichocephalic skull, while Native Africans, a lot of those tribes, they have more shorter and rounder skulls, like the Bushmans. So that is true. That is a great observation from Sir Harry Johnston, and it's a true observation. So he's talking about the Elamites. So let's see what the Elamites look like. So this is the depiction of the Elamites. Ancient depiction. They were archers. The Elamite archers. They fought in the armies of Persia. You see what I'm saying? And so their trade, or their skill rather, was to be an archer. So that's why you see them with their arching tools, right? But the point is, what do these people look like? Because you may find people who say, well, they look like Indians, right? Indians who live in India, because Indians, a lot of them are darker than us, right? But the reason why I would say, okay, yeah, I can see why you say that, but I disagree is because if you look at the hair always gives it away. These are coils, right? This is 4C hair. This is 4C type hair. And then look at the beards. Look at the beards. These are BDBs. These are coils. This only happens with woolly hair. So they're brown or black because, again, black people aren't the color of, black crayons. We're brown. We're ruddy. We range from dark brown to light brown, right? Um, but in addition to that, we have kinky and curly hair or coily hair. We have different types of hair types, but mostly it's a woolly hair type. You may have black people who have more stronger nappy hair, BDBs or whatever the case may be. And then you have black people who have more straighter hair. And then you have black people who have more curly hair. You see what I'm saying? And that doesn't necessarily means that they have admixture, right? Now we know that to be a fact too. If you're mixed, then your hair will tend to be straighter or more curly. But you have black people, full black people, who have different types of hair. Like, for example, my hair is more straighter and curlier than nappy. You see what I'm saying? Now it's a little nappy, but it ain't as nappy as a lot of other people I know, but it's more straighter. You see what I'm saying? So, but I say all that to say is we can look at their skin tone, and if that's not enough, we can look at their hair type, because you don't see Indians with this hair type. Now, yeah, you might see the cities who are, said to have come from Africa. They have this hair type and this phenotype. But traditional indigenous Indians, or not indigenous, but the current inhabitants of India right now, they may have the skin tone, but they have straight hair. They have more Aryan type hair because they mixed. Because the original Indians were black. You see what I'm saying? But these are Elamites who have nappy hair, curly hair, and they're black. And these are descendants of Shem. All right, let's get into the next source. Black Jews on the classification and geographical distribution of the mammalia. This is written by Richard Owens, and I want to say this is from, here it is, 1859. This is the University of Cambridge in the Senate House. So this is a credible source. All right, with the reference to the characteristics of color, which are extreme, we have now opportunities of knowing how much that character is the result of the influence of climate, right? We know it more particularly by that most valuable mode of testing such influences, which we derive from the peculiarity of the Jewish race. For 1800 years, that race has been dispersed in different latitudes and climates, and they have preserved themselves distinct from intermixture with other races of mankind. Because again, Torah tells us not to mix with other nations, not for the sake of race, like many people make it seem. No, it's for the sake of not getting your heart turned away from Yah and going into strange cultures. That was always the warning. Don't go into these strange women. He was telling Samson, don't go into these strange women. He was same thing with Solomon, because what happened when they went into the strange women, they adopted the ways of those strange women, like Solomon did, for example. And then with Samson and Delilah, he put his trust in that strange woman, and what did she do? She betrayed him, and she cut his power off. All right, so for 1800 years, the race has been dispersed in different latitudes and climates, and they have preserved themselves distinct from intermixture with other races of mankind. The Negro, that's what the Negro does. We've been scattered to the four corners of the earth, and we still maintain what we have preserved ourselves distinct from intermixture. Now, of course, there was a lot of grape going on, with a lot of these different dispersions, but at the same time, uh, just because, okay, let's say you're the product of that grape, you see what I'm saying, during the slave trade. Most of the times what would happen is that the product of that union would go back and intermarry back into the black population. You see what I'm saying? And so we would kind of just absorb that DNA, and we would still maintain who we were in our phenotypes, because it was a crime to basically marry white people, it was a crime to marry black people, all that type of stuff. So we stayed amongst ourselves, and we still do that for the most part, no matter where we're at. We stay amongst ourselves. There are some Jews still lingering in the valleys of the Jordan, having been oppressed by the successive conquerors of Syria for ages, a low race of people, and described by trustworthy travelers as being black as any of the Ethiopian races, right? As any of the Ethiopian races. So this is saying that there are Jews at this time. This was written in 1859, before the Balfour Declaration, before a lot of these political motives to erase history had been going on. This is from 1859, during the times of slavery. Still, there were still Jews lingering in the valley of the Jordan. A remnant, right? And it says that they've been oppressed by the successive conquerors, because you got to think, you had conquerors who were from Syria. You had Arabs, you had Turks, you had the Romans, the Greeks. So you had a lot of different conquerors, of these lands, and it describes these by trustworthy travelers. They are described as being black as any of the Ethiopian races. Now, see, this is very important, because this is almost like a smoking gun. They're describing them black as any of the Ethiopian races, because every scholar, every biblical scholar, every, pretty much, theologian, whatever the case may be, these people all agree that the Ethiopians or the Cushites are black, right? They even go so as far as to say that the Egyptians were Mediterranean, while the Cushites and the Ethiopians were black, right? And that's what they even call us. They call us Cushites because we're black. So why is it that he's saying that these Jews who still live in the valley of the Jordan are described as being as black as any of the Ethiopian races? Why would he compare them to Ethiopians? He could have said as black as, or as brown as any other Mediterranean, as brown as any other Iraq and the Middle Eastern pop. No, he describes them as Cushites, as Ethiopians. Next source. Let's talk about the Mavumbu Jews. This is Maurice Fishberg, talking about a study of race and environment. This was written in 1911. It is stated that the Falashas are not the only Jews of the Negro race, right? Because we see the Falashas, they live in Israel today. And they assume that those are the only so-called black Jews that exist. But it says Bastian speaks of Negro Jews living in the Luango coast in Western Africa. The Luango coast is Angola, in Congo. And it says they are called the Mavumbu or Judeos. They are on the whole a fair-looking race, says Bastian. They are more serious and restrained than the rest of the Negroes. Although in other places they are despised, here they are taking a dominating position, which would cause a lot of envy and jealousy, and would motivate a lot of the other indigenous tribes to want to sell them into slavery. But I digress on that point. That's just me interjecting. Or at the least, such as to be respected and partly even feared, because they are rich and have most of the commerce in their hands. The same author claims that they are of the Negro race, Still, he detected Semitic facial features in their physio. I ain't gonna go there. All right, I'm gonna leave that alone. But basically, he's detecting Semitic facial features, right, in their phenotype, and Semitic facial features. That's interesting, right? So we got sources that's going to tell us what Semitic facial features are, and it compares them to the Bakaris of the Red Sea, right? And I think we might have already went over that source. Let me see. No, I don't think we got there yet. But they label the Semitic facial features, and it's down further, but they compare them to the Bakaris of the Red Sea. So let's get into the next source. This is Cambridge University Press. Black Jews: The Religious Challenge of Politics versus Religion. Author is Ulysses Santamaria. This is from 1987. All right. In the reign of John II of Portugal, nearly 700 Jews were taken from their kin and deported to the island of Sao Tome on the west coast of Africa. The island is close to Nigeria, Cameroon, and Gabon. Escaping from Sao Tome, The Jews immigrated to the coast of Angola between 1484 and 1499. Wow, okay. So these Jews escaped from Sao Tome and they went to the coast of Angola. And this is in the 1400s. This is well before the transatlantic slave trade. They must have settled in several Portuguese colonies over the centuries, mixed with the indigenous black population. And this is them trying to explain away because they don't want to admit that these Jews who were deported from Spain and Portugal, right? And we'll get deeper into that history further down the line, but they don't want to admit, so they're explaining away, saying that they mix with the indigenous populations, which is partially true, but they still were originally black. Because why would you deport a white race of people, not even race, but a white stock of people, European stock of people, to Africa, where Africa was called the white man's graveyard because they couldn't stand the malaria, right? They didn't have that sickle cell trait that allowed them to withstand malaria. So why would you deport Europeans to the west coast of Africa out of all places? That don't even make sense. Unless they were black, then that would make sense. So this is just them trying to explain away. So they're giving partial truths. They must have settled in Portuguese colonies over the centuries, mixed with the indigenous black population near the Congo and Gabon. In 1776, black Jews called Bavumbu, or even Mavumbu, Mayambo, May, or Mavumbu, lived on the coast of Luango by the river named Rio Muni. It would seem that they adopted Christianity at the same time as maintaining their Judaism. By 1847, David Livingstone discovered a group of educated blacks living in the interior, some 200 miles from the coast of Luando. These blacks were called the Jews of Angola. They were good merchants, learned easily, and had knowledge of Portuguese law and history. They were often employed as clerks and writers. For Livingstone, there was no doubt but that these people were the descendants of those who had been deported from Portugal in the 15th century. Other evidence support his intuition. In Savage Africa, Winwood Reed writes of having met in Guinea. So we got Angola, we got Sao Tome, and we got Guinea that's saying that there's black Jews there. Having met in Guinea, blacks claim to be Portuguese around 1864, because we got to realize the Portuguese settlements were in where? Guinea, Angola, Congo, Senegal, a lot of these other places, Nigeria, a lot of these places. So, of course, this is where a lot of the those who were expelled from Spain and Portugal went to these Portuguese colonies in Africa. In Savage Africa, Winwood Reed writes of having met in Guinea blacks claiming to be Portuguese around 1864. So they were still holding this identity to 1864. Closer to our time, Dr. J. Krupple noted sometime after the First World War that a large community of black Jews existed in the interior of Dahomey. We just read about Dahomey, right? Where was Dahomey? Slave Coast, aka Judah. Okay, it's all coming together. The Jews had the 5 books of Moses. Y'all don't mind the background. That's my baby's crying. These Jews had the 5 books of Moses written in old parchment in Hebrew. Why? So in Dahomey, these Jews had the 5 books of Moses written in old parchment in Hebrew. So they had scrolls written in Hebrew, the Torah. Wow. All right, let's keep going. Black Mavumbu Jews in Angola. This is Africa by LSE Recluse, right? So we just had another source by LSE Recluse as well. No, this is the same source. I'm sorry. The Earth and its Inhabitants, Universal Geography of West Africa, written in 1830. This is chapter 10. It says, between Gabon estuary and Luando, Povo Grande, the largest village in Portuguese territory, is dispersed amongst the bananas and gardens stretching along the coast south of Cabinda. One of its hamlets was capital of the former kingdom of Nigoyo. A part of the local trade is in the hands of the Mavumbus. Who's the Mavumbus? The Jews. A people of grave and solemn aspect, with intelligent eyes, straight or even aquiline nose. Straight or even aquiline nose, whose pronounced Semitic type has earned for them the Portuguese designation of Judeos Pretos, or Black Jews. They may certainly be regarded as of Jewish origin. If the statement be true that they are strict observers of the Shabbat, or the Sabbath, abstaining even from all conversation on that day. According to the neighbors of Mavumbus, other Mavumbus were expressly created by God to punish other mortals by reducing them to poverty. So they're describing these black Jews, and they're saying that they have intelligent eyes, straight nose, and have a pronounced Semitic type, right? Um, and this is funny because, okay, if you're targeting the people for slavery, who would you target? Especially you trying to capture slaves for them to come and build and colonize and help you colonize a new set of land. What would you do? Would you go for, the Bushmen who live, what they would call man, I can't, it's losing me. Basically they live, primitive, that's it, that's the word, they live more primitively? Or would you go and capture the ones who are intelligent, who basically are ruling over these people, or said to be ruling over a lot of these native inhabitants, right? Which one would you choose? You would choose the more intelligent type of slave, right? Because slaves were, they were prized chattel. You see what I'm saying? We were prized chattel. And so the slaves built this country. We built the White House. We colonized the lands. We worked the fields. We were carpenters. We were masons. We were pastoralists. We were agriculturalists. We were everything they needed us to be. We were skilled labor. They didn't just go randomly snatching people. These are lies they told you about the slave trade. They didn't just go randomly snatching people. No, they knew exactly who they were taking. So these are the Mavumbu Jews. They're describing them. All right, this is from Cambridge Library Collection, the Nautical Magazine and Naval Chronicles for 1870. And it says, Barber states that in the reign of Don John II, or King John II of Portugal, in about the close of the 15th century, large number of Jews were expelled from Portugal and taken to the coast of southern Guinea. So in addition to Angola, they're taken to the coast of southern Guinea. That the island of St. Thomas, which is not more than 100 miles from the mainland, was populated by mulattoes, descended from Jewish exiles and Anglo women. Now, a lot of people debate this, where it says Anglo women, whether it's mistaking it for Angolan women or Anglo women, white women, right? But it's saying that they're mulattoes. It is possible that the Jewish type of character noticed at the Gabon and Luango may have originated from this source. But if so, it is unknown to the present inhabitants of the country, and it would have been somewhat singular if the Roman Catholic missionaries at Luango had not detected this circumstance. So it's saying the Roman Catholic missionaries detected this circumstance instead of regarding them as a pure African family of Jews. So when it's calling them mulattoes, this is just a interjection of the Roman Catholic missionaries. This is something that they want to believe, because they don't want to regard them as a pure African family of Jews, so they rather call them mulattoes, descendants of Jewish exiles and Anglo women, where we see there's no proof of that as we get more into the sources of the Spanish Inquisition, right? But nevertheless, it's still affirming that they were Black Jews. All right, this is an account of Timbuktu and Hausa, territories in the interior of Africa, by El-Hajj Absalom Shabini. I forget what year this is from. I'll have to look it up and find it for y'all, but I know this is an older source as well. So this is page 187. It's talking about Yehudi, right? What does that sound like? Yahudim? Yahudi? Okay. A place of great trade. They call this place Yehudi. This place is reported to be inhabited by one of the lost tribes of Israel, possibly an immigration from the tribe of Yehuda, right? Because Jews or Yahudim are from the tribe of Yehuda or Judah. Yehuda in African Arabic signifies Judah. Yehudi signifies Jew. It is, excuse me, I'm sorry. It is not impossible that many of the lost tribes of Israel may be found dispersed in the interior regions of Africa. When we shall become better acquainted with the continent, it is certain that some of the nations that possess the country eastward of Palestine, when the Israelites were a favored nation, have immigrated to Africa. So this is attesting, this source, and I'm assuming this is a Muslim Islamic source, because of the name El-Hajj Abdi Salam Shabini. This sounds like a more Muslim or Islamic name. And there's a lot of good, Islamic sources as well, as I'm gonna get into in a minute as well. But this is basically saying that the lost tribes of Israel immigrated into the interior regions of Africa. So this is talking about Jews fleeing into Africa and attesting to Black Jews in Africa. All right, this is another great source, Leo Africanus, who lived from 1492 to 1550. And this is probably where I'll stop at today. Let me see how many more slides we got left because I wanna finish up on the next one. So I'll probably go through, man, man. Oh man, never mind. We probably might have a few more videos, y'all. But I'm probably just gonna stop at this slide today. Let me get back to where I was. All right. So this is of the Jews or the Jews, because you got to remember in Old English there was no J, so there was a I E. So the name Jesus, it was originally Isis. It wasn't Jesus, and that's not even his real original name, anyways. It's Yahushua HaMashiach. Isis or Jesus is not even a translation or a transliteration of the original name for the Messiah. I digress on that point. But the origin of the Jews, IEWES. And it's interesting because you also have a tribe in West Africa called the Airways or the EWES, the U's, or the Jews. So that's another connection right there. So it says the Jews or the Jews who have been, and you know, it might take me a little longer to read it because it's kind of written in Old English, because you see the U instead of the V and all that type of stuff. But it says the Jews who have been dispersed by God throughout the whole world to confirm to to confirm us in the holy faith, entered into Ethiopia in the queen of Sheba or Saba's days, in company of a son that Solomon had by her, to the number, and that's talking about Menelik, to the number, as the Abyssinians affirm, of 12,000, and they multiplied their generation exceedingly. So the ones who came with the king, with the son of King Solomon, Menelik, who he had with the queen of Sheba, it says they multiplied. They came in 12,000, and there they multiplied in Ethiopia or Abyssinia. And that they have not only filled Abyssinia, but spread themselves likewise over the neighbor provinces, so that at this day, the Abyssinians affirm that upon the Nilus or the Nile River toward the west, there inhabited a most populous nation of the Jewish stock or the Jewish stock. So to the west, right? So upon the Nile is toward the west, on the west of the Nile, there is a more populous nation. Now we know beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, that's Western Africa, right? That's going into Western, Central, and West Africa. So west of the Nile, there was the most populous nation of the Yahudim or the Jews under a mighty king. In that K period, it means king. Just like we seen on the map where it said the kingdom of Judah, K period, and then of Judah, that means kingdom or king. And some of the modern cosmographers set down a province in those quarters, which they call the land of the Hebrews. So they calling this in Africa the land of the Hebrews, placed as it were under the equi. I want to say this means the equator, in certain unknown mountains between the confines of Abyssinia and Congo. So between Abyssinia and Congo, this is where most of the Yahudim were under a mighty king. Does that sound like the kingdom of Congo? Okay. And likewise, on the north part of the kingdom of Goim, which I want to say is Guinea, in the southerly quarter of the kingdom of Goram, these are certain mountains, people with Jews or Jews, who there maintain themselves free and absolute through the inaccessible situations of the same. For in truth, by this means, the inhabitants of the mountain, speaking generally, are the most ancient and freest people, in that the strong situation of their native soil secureth them from the incursions of foreign nations and the violence of their neighbors, such as the Scots in Britain and the Biscaynes in Spain. But to return again to our purpose, the Nzichi, who extend from the banks of the river Zaire even to the confines of Nubia, use circumcision as also uh, Dyer's other bordering people do. A thing must be necessarily have been brought by the Jews or the Jews, and yet remaining still in use after the annihilation of the Mosaic law amongst them. Some also think that the people called Caphri or Caphates at this day, who are Gentiles, draw their origin from the Jews. So the Caphri or the Caphates draw their origin from the Jews. Keep that in mind. But being in I want to say being environed on every side by idolaters. They have little by little swayed from the law of Moses, and so are become, as it were, insensibly idolaters on the other side. The Jews being wonderfully increased in Spain. So the Jews in Spain passed one after another into Afrique or Africa and Mauritania and dispersed themselves even to the confines of Numidia, especially by the means of traffic. Numidia, what is that? That's Numidia, especially by the means of traffic in the profession of goldsmith, the which being utterly forbidden, the Mohammedans is altogether practiced among them by the slaves and are likewise um, dyers, other merchant, mechanical crafts, but principle that of the blacksmiths, a thing which notably appeareth among in Mount. I'm sorry, y'all, I'm having trouble. Appeared in Mount Safsua, the kingdom of Morocco. In Mount Anita, it is said that the what is that? Duet, a town in the kingdom of Morocco, was inhabited by Yahudim or Jews of the stock, as they affirm, of David. So this is in Morocco, who notwithstanding by little and little are grown Mohammedans. The Jews increased after in Afrique or Africa, when first king of Spain called the Catholic, and after him Emmanuel, king of Portugal, put them forth of their dominions. For then many went over into the kingdoms of Fez and Morocco, and they brought in, I think that's where that ends. Wait, hold on, let me see. Yeah, and they went in, they brought in. So basically, right here, we see that he's talking about the Jews who not only came into Ethiopia with the son of King Solomon and Queen Sheba, but he's also talking about the ones who were expelled from Spain and Portugal. They went into places like Mauritania, Morocco, and it says they even went as far as down as Namibia, right? So they was all down the west coast of Africa. They was all throughout Africa dispersed there. I'm gonna go on to probably two more sources. The Spanish and Portuguese Jews, and this is the history of the Jews from the destruction of Jerusalem to the present by Hannah Adams, written in she lived 1755 to 1831. The Spanish and Portuguese Jews claim their descent from the tribe of Judah and found these pretensions on a supposition which prevails among them that many of their ancestors removed or were sent into Spain at the time of the Babylonian captivity, Nebuchadnezzar. In consequence of this supposed superiority, they will till very lately would not by marriage or otherwise incorporate with their brethren of other nations. They had separate synagogues. So these Jews of Spain and Portugal, they wouldn't mix with other Jews of other nations. They had separate synagogues. Why is that? Okay. That was page 367. So this is 368. They had separate synagogues, and if a Portuguese Jew, even in England or Holland, married a German Jewess, who are the German Jews? The Ashkenazis, right? He was immediately expelled from the synagogue, deprived of every civil and ecclesiastical right, and ejected from from the body of the nation. So it was looked at it was frowned upon for a Portuguese or a Spanish Jew, but in this case, a Portuguese Jew to marry a German Jewess or Ashkenazi Jewess, and so they would be ejected from the body of the nation. It says in Portugal, the name of a Jew is a term of such high reproach that the government found it necessary to enact a law which forbade any person to call another by the appellation. If a man who is styled a Jew to his face stabs the offender, the law does not condemn him, and trifling as it is, It goes on to say something else, but basically, it was looked down upon to be called a Jew, even if you were a Jew in Spain and Portugal, and you could stab somebody in the face and get away with it. It says the Jews in Portugal remain separated from the Germans and retain their ritual usages, but the government has destroyed the obstacles which the institutions of Portugal opposed to their marriage with the Germans. So basically, the Portuguese and the Spanish Jews didn't want to mix with the Ashkenazi Jews or the German Jews at that time, and it was heavily looked down upon. All right. Um, this is the Bakari of the Red Sea right here. These are the Bakaris who live by the Red Sea. And this saying in the sources said that they had Semitic facial features. So this right here is what you would consider Semitic facial features, right? Um, in regard to the human race, it has been shown abundantly and historically that each of the external differences often ceases to be characteristic. Thus, the black color is found not only in individuals as the black Jews of Portugal. So the same Jews we just read about, the Jews in Portugal and Spain, this is saying that they're black as the black Jews of Portugal. But in the tribes as the Bakaris on the Red Sea, whose hair and character are perfectly Semitic. So the Bakari of the Red Sea, we read about them in earlier sources, right? The Bakaris of the Red Sea, this is their phenotype, perfectly Semitic. You clearly see it black. This is also calling the Portuguese Jews black. Now, this is a painting of a Portuguese in the 16th century who was in Japan. So this is a depiction of a Portuguese man. We can assume that he's a Jew, but it's just saying of a Portuguese. But we clearly see right here that it says the black Jews of Portugal. It's calling the Jews black. All right, this is another painting titled "The Negro" by a Portuguese painter. This was painted in 1869, right? So we clearly see that when they say black, this is what they mean. This is what they mean by black. So this is what the Spanish and Portuguese Jews look like. All right, so I'm gonna stop right there. And we'll get more into the Spanish and Portuguese Jews, and then we'll get into some DNA, and then we'll get into my personal, DNA as well, and everything like that. But I pray this bless y'all. Like I said, all these sources you can find them online. I did not come up with these sources myself. This is just things that I gleaned from a lot of the faithful brothers who are diligent in their research and different things like that. And I just compiled everything together. And at the end, I'll give everybody their credit as far as who contributed to this slideshow. But I just want to kind of go through this and let y'all know that, hey man, this stuff is really out there, and who the true Israelites of the Bible are. So I'm gonna go ahead, bring y'all back. All right, so we'll end it there for today. I pray this bless somebody. If you got any questions, leave them down in the comment section below. Please be respectful in the comment section, or you will be blocked and you will be reported, because we don't play that over here, right? If you won't say it in my face, don't say it in my comments. All right, so with that, I just want to say peace, blessings, and shalom or shalom.